You're listening to the Ground Transportation Podcast with Ken Lucci of Driving Transactions and James Blaine of PAX Training. Learn how you can build a thriving transportation business with real profits, repeat clients, and enterprise value. And now for your hosts, Ken and James.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ground Transportation Podcast. Today, I don't have my wonderful host, Ken. He is no doubt doing a massive sale or acquisition out there somewhere that we won't even be able to know about for a couple months. I'm super excited about my guest today, Paul from Superior out in Virginia Beach. Paul, you and I really kind of are in lockstep, I think, on the need for luxury service, for the experience, for everything that comes with that. And so I really am excited to get this episode where we can really kind of zero in on that. And I won't steal your thunder because you've got this awesome quote, this awesome way that you like to sum it up that I think is absolutely beautiful. But before we dive into all that, can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into the industry? Why is this service so important? Where'd you start out that you got to that point?
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me today. And I do think that, part of it is I came out of a food service operation in Norfolk, Virginia that was white tablecloth, top of the line products going to top of the line restaurants. And while I was doing that, I became a news junkie. And it seemed like every time I sat down, I was watching Alan Greenspan jump out of a town car going up into the Capitol or the Federal Reserve or wherever he was going. I said, man, that looked like it'd be a great job to have, drive people around like that. So I thought about it for a while. And the company that I worked for burnt to the ground. And they had to move their
literally burned to the ground?
Literally burnt to the ground.
Okay.
On like a hot August day, it was just, and two buildings full of certified Angus beef just up in smoke. It was like unbelievable to watch. But anyway, so I had the opportunity to commute back and forth to Richmond or follow my dream that was in my head of owning my own business. So I looked around and this town, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Virginia, was really trying to grow and become big places. Downtown Norfolk had essentially been boarded up for years, and the plywood was coming off a lot of the business fronts downtown. Virginia Beach was talking about building this town center with Fortune 500 companies, and that thing in the back of my head about car service just kept on bothering me.
Okay.
So I went out and bought a car and decided I would be different from anybody else. So use a Cadillac instead of a town car. Okay. And I got started. And fortunately for me, somebody in the industry called me up and said, hey, look, you can't do this. You have to get legal before you do this. So I was introduced to getting the certificate of operation in Virginia and paying for insurance. And then another friend from Richmond needed me as an affiliate, and I was extremely fortunate to have that one piece that, he was far enough away that I wasn't competition, but I was far enough away that he could tell me, this is what you need to do.
And what year is this, Paul? When are you starting this out?
2003 into 2004.
Okay. And is this your first business? Is this your first time going off and starting a business?
Yes.
Okay. So you've basically, and it's funny because Bruce, my partner, he's got a similar story, right? You're coming from this high-end restaurant. You're coming from high-end service. You kind of see this opportunity. And so you figure out your differentiator. You jump into business. And so what was that affiliate kind of the main source of business when you started, or where does it kind of go from there?
Well, he is still an affiliate. I mean, but yes, he, didn't send me a lot of business, but what he did do was tell me, you got to go to the Virginia Limousine Association meetings.
Yep.
You have to go to the National Limousine Association meeting. He told me, the difference, you go to Atlantic City meetings and you meet all the leather and gold chains, and you go out to to Las Vegas and you meet the suits and cufflinks. And,
I love this.
You've got to be in both of those circles to make it in this business. And one thing I did not want to do was own a limousine. Things in my past, I just didn't want to get up on Saturday and Sunday mornings and clean limousines. That's not what I want to do.
So what kind of Cadillac were you running then?
Back then it was DHS, and that they were kind of mutating. They were DHSs, and I can't remember DHLs, but I got a couple of them. I had two of them that were stretched 5 and 8 inches, which was great.
Okay.
Customers loved them, and they were different. They were very, very different from the Lincoln Town Car. So it was expensive, and I learned a big lesson in life about buying things that you have no idea what you're getting into. But we survived it so far.
Yeah. Starting a business, right? I
yes.
mean, that's all of, I think I probably speak for every entrepreneur. If we all had the right amount of money we needed to start with, it's because we've started something before. I can tell you in all of my experience in business, a lot of it is learning as you go. All right. So you've got these vehicles, you've got everything there. What does that progression kind of look like? So you said you got it to multiple vehicles. How did you get to that point?
That's probably one of my better stories. I really thought it would just be me and my car forever. I didn't anticipate growing. I didn't know where it would take me. But one morning, I had a referral from one of my clients, and at 4:30 in the morning, I show up, and there's 2 golf bags that came right out of Caddyshack. The big, got a keg in them, that type of thing. 4 suitcases, and I'm like, what would you like to go to the airport first, you or your golf clubs? I was stuck. 4:30 in the morning, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, at that point, I did hire a guy that he liked what he saw in my business. He had worked for another company, and I said, look, you got to get in a car and come over here and help me as quickly as you can. And that afternoon, I started to look for how am I going to get an SUV into my fleet. So that was the first super expansion, getting that SUV, and then going from 2 to 3 to 4 cars, to me was, I thought would be the limit. I would say that, we're lucky if this could be rated as a 4th tier market. I don't think it makes 3-tier status. It's a different environment than, say, New York, DC, Atlanta. It's a military town. It's a resort town. And, car service just wasn't a big thing when I got started. And I found out as I was going why it wasn't. It just, people want to be in their cars. And I was told time and time again, without a limousine, you're just not going to make it. It's just, you got to have a limousine. And I've always put that in my mind. The day that I can write a check for a limousine, I might buy a limousine. But we haven't reached that day yet. So, I eventually started to hire more people. Was very fortunate. My friend in Richmond kind of forced me to meet people. He referred me. He was very kind to tell other people about me. And, my reputation kind of grew within the affiliate networks. And I've been very fortunate. And that's basically, a big part of my business, if not the biggest part, is doing other people's work at their level. And I think that that's one key thing we'll talk about is at that level where when I came in, envisioned what I needed to be in business doing this.
Well, and you've hit on a lot of really interesting things. And one of the topics that we see and one of the themes that comes back on almost every single episode is almost everyone who's successful in this industry figures out very on that they need to develop their network, right? Their personal network. And typically there's a level of mentorship. You talked about early on, you had that person that said, hey, you need to get licensed, you need to get legal, right? You've got your mentorship there, you've got the NLA, you've got the different pieces there. And so I think it's really interesting that for you've got kind of the vision and the dream, and then you were fortunate enough to have people help get you on the path. Now, let me ask you something. You've mentioned a couple times, that limo side. And I find that really interesting because I know you're a very service-oriented person. Help us kind of understand why kind of that aversion to the limousine. What is it that kind of steers you away from that, or why isn't that part of your model?
Well, in a way, it's extremely personal. And I will tell you, because I've mentioned this in public before, I am an alcoholic. I've been sober now for 35 years. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't want to go into that party scene. I envisioned what it would get me into, and my head said, no, that's not what we want to do. And that was the big reason to stay out of it. Yeah. But then as I looked, and became a little bit more, I guess, thrown into the pool of what we do, there is a huge difference between that side of the world and what we do on the corporate side.
Yeah.
And, here again, limousines aren't everyday things. They may have been back then in New York City. You would see people pull up in cars and in limos. Even I think that's pretty much gone by the side up there. People don't want
I
that big
agree.
flashy, be seen coming out of a limousine. It's tough enough for a lot of people to be seen getting out of a town car or, a regular sedan. So there were personal reasons, and I just, it's not what I wanted to do. And I really thought that there was a great opportunity to do this side of it. So,
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of that, in staying away from that part of the retail side, you also probably didn't have to worry about that transition. Because I think one of the things that we've seen throughout the industry, and really I'd say throughout kind of society, is there's kind of this view now of what they term quiet luxury. You might have someone that is wearing a hoodie and wearing, jeans that is a multi-billionaire, right? Now, obviously, those are probably not Walmart hoodie, Walmart jeans. They're, like I said, they're quiet luxury. They're a high-end brand. It's one of those things where you would know. And so you've got kind of that understated part. And then the other side we've seen is there's a lot more. I mean, if you've got a bride getting in the back of a stretch limousine and trying to get that dress in and do everything there is tough. Where now it's a lot easier to step and walk into a Sprinter. So a lot of times we're seeing that there. Now you've still got your Miamis, your Vegas, right? You've got kind of your markets that are more known for that, where, you want the opposite. The idea is to show up in kind of what I always termed the cartoon stretch, right? It just keeps going on forever. But I think just as in general, we're seeing less of that unless it's in one of those markets. So I think that kind of positions you well there in terms of what you're doing.
well, and I think that even if you really look closely, a lot of people changed their names from Joey's Limousine Service to, Ike's Transportation.
Oh,
And, I
absolutely.
think that I was fortunate I didn't have to go through worrying about that side of it too.
Well, and
So,
I think you bring up a really good point, and that I think there's been a connotation with the word limousine, and we're even seeing it, the Limousine Association of New Jersey, right? Lange, they've now become the Chauffeured Transportation Association of New Jersey. And we're seeing that push for chauffeur. This year, NLA has spent a huge amount on their GBTA push, and they're really driving that chauffeur, that NLA ride. So I think a lot of that is just kind of trying to understand what expectation in industry is. And I think now that term limousine almost is starting to feel a little dated. With that in mind, let me ask you then, what kind of became, obviously you mentioned, you had the execs traveling with the Caddyshack golf bags. What does that kind of progress to in terms of the type of exec work, the type of ways that you're able to grow in that market? And then knowing that from the very beginning, you kind of wanted to be that Cadillac, how have you been able to leverage kind of that background to get you into that exec side?
well, I was fortunate the coming out of the high end restaurant business. I knew a lot of restaurateurs and hoteliers who were very helpful and they wanted me to succeed and introduced me
Yeah.
to a lot of people. The other part of this is I had never had to do cold calls before getting out there and doing that. And this put me in that position where I had to do cold calls and I didn't like it. I'm not the salesperson that I probably should be to make this work better. But there were a lot of things going on. I mentioned that the town center of Virginia Beach was coming into play. I met somebody that recommended I belong to the Central Business District Association, join the chamber, and exposed myself to a lot of people. This one person that I had hired early on was a big advocate of radio advertising, and he got me, unfortunately or fortunately, hooked up with a trade situation that I'm still in, but the
Okay.
exposure is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
it's three or four of the top area radio stations, and that got me into some entertainment stuff. And then, at the shows, the more people that knew me were introducing me to other people because everybody asked who to use in our market. And
Yep.
fortunately for me, I was the name at that time. Hopefully, still am. But going to businesses that were coming here, and this is it's an emerging market here. The military and government contractors was probably the biggest business, probably still is the biggest business in the area, but shipping has grown. Underwater, undersea communications has become huge. So there has been a big expanse of corporate businesses moving into the area, and it's a great place. We do have our issues. We're separated from a huge airport on the other side of the water by a tunnel that's constantly under construction and constantly has an accident. And people always say, how come you charge so much to go to the other side of the water? And it's this big on the map. Well,
it's an adventure in real life.
It is an adventure, and it can take a 35-minute trip can become 3 hours in an instant, and it's been tough to really gauge how we do that because many years I just lost a ton of money doing that. And again, learning experience. But There's corporate business over there. The shipbuilding business is huge. Transportation on the other side of the water is huge. So there's many reasons for me to have to, grow and cover a lot of it. I went to a building that was being built at one point in part of the area, and I left a business card there, and somebody called me back. It was just amazing that somebody called me back. So I was like maybe one or two of us, so I was in the car a lot. So I had to return that call, and the person that answered the call happened to be the CEO of the company and said, "Oh, she's out today. I'm taking her phone call." So I was like, wow. So I was fortunate, and to meet big people. There was not really anybody in the area doing what we did. So, my only thing was that I had to keep it going, and I couldn't be in the car and do my business. And, there had to be the search for the right people to get into the car, take over, and, me answer the phone, and eventually have somebody in the office to answer the phone. So, as I was getting more comfortable talking to people, because I was not comfortable talking to CEOs and presidents of company, it was hard enough to get past the gatekeepers when you go to the office and they're like, "Oh, no, the limo company," and throw your card down. So that transition from being a delivery driver on the back of a truck to putting a suit and tie on and standing in front of people was a big move. And I realized that when you have a suit and tie on, people really pay attention to you.
Right.
Today, even more. I think if I walk into a place without my suit and tie on, people don't even know who I am, which is great sometimes. But I do think it helps the persona of what we do stand out and keeps us in business.
Well, and I think there's something really important to be said there, right? When you have a society, it's summertime here in Kansas, right? And in the Kansas City area, we don't get to play golf all year, right? This is in Florida. We got a season for golf, right? You really, this time of year, we're only able to play in the evenings because you basically cook, right? Middle of summer. And then you have kind of your fall and spring that you basically can go out there anytime you want. But it's interesting because you start looking at golf, you start looking at airline travel, you start looking at any of these key historic things. Even traveling by ship, people used to put on their absolute best attire, right? My wife and I were in church the other day, and we talked about how even your Sunday best now is not quite at the same standard it used to be. I was looking at photos of my late grandfather with my great uncle, and he showed me pictures of them as a kid. And, they're 6, 7 years old, and they have little suits that they would wear. And that was the church suit. And they come from a big family of boys. So that suit had been passed down, but you took care of it because in that time you had that suit. Now we're at an age where suits are becoming less common. And one of the neat things about our industry is that when you have someone that's getting picked up, that's, an airport drop off, anything like that, and you've got someone that's in that sharp, crisp, good looking suit, standing up straight, you're instantly lending that same status and credibility to that person. Whatever credibility and status that you have just by the way you look, you now get to lend that and apply that to your passenger. And I will tell you, one of my biggest things that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well, is when I travel and I go to airports, as soon as I come down the escalator or as soon as I come out of security, I'm looking. And I am seeing less and less of those sharply dressed chauffeurs, right? You've always had the shuttle guys, you've always had that, but those sharply dressed luxury chauffeurs that are supposed to represent the high end, we're seeing less and less of that. And so I think to your point, like you said with the suit, we're at a stage now where that becomes even more important, even more credibility. So I think that's huge. Now, let me ask you something. You've got a quote, and I'm not going to take it from you. I'm going to let you share it with us. You've got a quote about kind of where we stand as an industry and kind of where we sit and where we're at in terms of luxury. One, will you share that with us? And then two, what do you see or what does that look like? And being someone that came in from outside the industry, how do you keep that going and how do you stay ahead of it?
Well, that's a great part and why I do think I am still where I am and I haven't given up. And that quote is that we are the last butlers on earth. And if you think about what we do as chauffeurs, that's what we are. We're butlers. And
Yeah.
it's something when I tell the people that are coming to work for me, you can see in their face that, I'm a what? And
They might not even know what that word means, Paul.
exactly. And when we look at it, what we do for chauffeurs, go through PAX training and you see the different things that are expected of us as chauffeurs, it makes a lot of sense. And, everybody says that we're, sliding into just casualness all over the place. And you mentioned, the CEOs wearing jeans and hoodies. And I thought holy jeans on Sunday was for church. I wasn't sure. But anyway, so we are servants. And it's a tough thing, to tell people or to teach people. And I think truly when you get somebody that comes into this business that knows what they're getting into, they can accept that. It's a hard thing to teach. These days in particularly, I dealt with a sergeant, the recently retired sergeant from the police department, and he said something to me that this guy, we were in training, and there were 4 females and 2 males in suits, and we were getting out of the SUVs, and they were talking. And the gentleman turns to my new chauffeur and says, "Will you get my bags?" And you could just see on his face, like, "What did you say?" And afterwards, after I saw in his face that look, I said, "Look, this is what we do. We are service." He goes, "But, for 18 years, I've told people what to do. I don't know if, this is what we do." And it is something that I think, when I go to the airport and I work with my guys, we get the luggage. We go to the carousels after we greet them at the bottom of the escalator. And it makes such a huge difference. And you can tell by watching the other people around, I wish I had that service. Yeah. And I've had, business people tell me a lot. How do we find the service in your area? So, that thing, we are the last butlers and we have to continue on the tradition of being a chauffeur, not just a driver. There's plenty of drivers out there. There's shuttles, there's taxis, there's our other friends with 4-letter words. And we, if we are going to succeed, have to be better than everybody else. And
absolutely.
Again, if you bring somebody in that understands it, and that's why I like to bring in military and first responders, because they have that sense of service with them already. I live in a huge military town, and I think that, I have a little bit of military background. So in those few things that we can bring into our everyday, how we do business, makes a difference.
And I think you've hit on a couple things that are really huge here. And I think one of the biggest ones, when we're talking about service, right? And this is something that we deal with at PAX. This is something I'm huge on. When you're dealing with customer service, one of the best things you can do is to have someone in control of the experience. And so one of my favorite, examples I give people is, if you have someone that comes up and says, "Hey, let me take those bags for you. I'm going to take those bags for you." That is not the same level of experience as if someone goes, "Oh, sir, I'd be happy to do that. May I take those bags for you?" Right? Now I'm 100% in control of the experience. My favorite example, and this is something that, and Bruce, my business partner at PAX, right? He comes from a Ritz-Carlton background. Bruce's biggest thing, and still a huge thing for us, is the handshake. If I walk up to you and I extend out my hand, I've taken control of that interaction, and you have 2 options. You have to respond in some way. However, if when I greet you, I am ready the second you want to shake hands or not shake hands, I've placed you in control of it. And I think one of the things that we're seeing more and more is that in a lot of the service industries, we are seeing a lot of frustration on both sides. And one of my favorite ones is if you look at what's happening with Starbucks baristas, if you look at anybody in the food service industry, the amount of negative interactions that are happening on both sides of the counter are increasing. The customer service is going down, the expectation of the customer, and you should be doing this, you should be doing that, why aren't you doing this? All of it is kind of declining. And that's an easy one to see. I think our job in all of ground transportation is two things. You have to understand where you sit, right? Even if you're driving the airport shuttle, you can provide incredible service and incredible experience, but you're not going to be at the exact same level as you would be, for example, if you're in chauffeured services. And so I think understanding the expectation and then keeping them in control of that interaction and making sure that you're anticipating their need is really kind of at the fundamentals of what we do. Now, I think one of my questions for you related to this would be, you've got kind of this group that you're looking at. You've identified these common traits, right? Your first responders, your service members. Twofold. One, how do you determine if someone that you've brought in to interview or you're potentially hiring, do you have a method that you're using to kind of spot check them or see if they've got that instinct? And then two, right? Obviously, you've got packs, but what are you doing beyond that to try and hone that or help direct them?
Well, that is probably one of the biggest challenges today as an owner trying to get employees in. And
Yeah.
over the years, I was fortunate that people that came to work for me knew somebody that was working for me or that I had worked with, and they recommended them. So I could kind of tell before they came in that they wanted to do this type of work.
Okay.
Over the past, right before the pandemic in particularly, I think it became very difficult to find anybody that wanted to work. And to do this, wear a suit, one of the first, I think, pushbacks you could tell is like, do I have to buy a suit? And that right there is, guess what? I'm wearing a suit. You came in here. Yes, you have to wear a suit. And I thought, going forward, that people would understand that when they walked into my office and saw me in a suit, but they didn't. People just didn't get this. And maybe it's because where we are and people aren't used to seeing chauffeurs at the airport. It's rare that, unless our guys are at the bottom of the escalator, it's rare that anybody's down there.
Well, but Paul, that goes back to what I was talking about, right? I remember one of my very first jobs, I went to go work at a pizza place. And I showed up in a suit and tie to an interview at 16 years old in a pizza place because I was taught you dress like you're interviewing for the CEO, right? You really show them you care. And I can tell you, I have found that even, and obviously I, in my world, my career is kind of a little offset to yours, but by about I don't know, probably fresh out of college, I saw that was done, right? People weren't doing that anymore. I was one of the last people who did that. And now I don't know that I hear of anyone, unless they're, a previous chauffeur, unless they come from a similar world. I don't know that anyone does that. Are you seeing that as well when people come to interview where no one ever comes in a suit?
Lately, I would say it's been 50-50. And a lot of times it might just be a sport coat and, good slacks, but there are a couple people that have come casual and, and they see me. And I think the first question I hear more than anything is, I should have worn a suit. I'm sorry.
But they identified it.
Yes. I think people, when they aren't thinking, well, am I a driver or a chauffeur? And I've hired some people out of the Uber Lyft world and, they want to do this. They just don't want to do it that way. And I think it was kind of neat to watch them transition into this side of it and try and, train them to be more of a chauffeur than just a driver following GPS down the road. But to get back to your question, when you can kind of tell by talking to people what their interest level is or what their dedication level is. And I think after a few years of doing this, you could pretty much tell when people talk to you what it is that they're looking for.
Right.
And it's rare that somebody comes in and says, I want to be a chauffeur. Most people want to know what it's about because,
Right.
again, in the neighborhood here, there aren't a lot of, chauffeured car services that people are used to seeing. So, I'm looking for people that are attentive, they're taking notes, they're asking the right questions, who's going to pay for my insurance, when I'm driving. So they have an interest already in what we're doing. And, a lot of people are curious.
Yeah.
They would like to do this because they want to be driving a big shiny car, with the superstars in the back seat, which, you kind of have to put a damper on that real quick and say, that's not what we do. That's not why we're here. But I think that the level of communication when they're speaking, if they're saying yes sir, no sir, and they may be older than I am, they get it, they
Yeah.
understand what we're doing. So those, you kind of pick out those little things, and again, I think it's the desire to work. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of people that really, really want to work, and when you talk to somebody and you can tell they want to do something. It's not just about the money. They are interested in doing this type of work. You can feel it. You can hear it in their voice. So those are the things I look at initially. If we come back, a lot of people don't come back for the second interview or, start the what I call the paper training. But you can tell when they come the second time and they're wearing a jacket and a tie and they haven't bought their suit yet. These people
They
want to
get
do
it.
this, and so it's usually the second come in that we really get a good idea of what the people are going to be like for us.
Well,
So,
and we talk about that at PAX. My partner Bruce has coined this term he likes called a heart for service. And it's something that we use to describe someone that is kind of wired for service. And one of the things that we love to talk about is the pen drop test, right?
mm,
So if you've got someone that you're interviewing, now there's people that klutz this up and obviously you gotta be a little slick to make this work, but essentially, you accidentally knock a pen off your desk or drop something, and you're looking for that instinct in the person to reach down and hand it to you, right? You want to see if they're instinctually wired for that. It is amazing when you drop something closer to someone else than to you, and they'll just look down at it, right? And they'll just look down at it and look up at you. Okay, that person does not have the natural instinct for service and helping and being there. And that doesn't mean they're a bad person. That doesn't mean they're a bad fit. But, I think kind of like you said, learning to look for the cues, learning to look for the signs, learning to look for the heart for service. And I think we've really got in our industry, and this is something, we've got in our hiring and training and retaining program, we talk about, your different ways to check for this, because to a certain extent, you can't hire Mr. Magoo, right? You have to have someone that has a safe driving record that you can go do a driving test with, you can go ride with them and feel confident. Does that mean that we can't tune them? We can't teach them to be more smooth. We can't have them focus on, feathering the brakes, stopping sooner. No, I mean, that's my whole life, right? I've spent, my whole career in training has been helping people refine those areas. But you've got to really find someone that has got a solid foundation on the driving and the safety side and has a solid foundation on the customer service. And I think the other big thing is kind of how you make them feel. I guess my question to you would be, what? So you've really made it a point of, having that higher level service. And it sounds like it puts you apart from, anyone else in that area. Why, if someone's listening to this and they're saying, we've got kind of safety and service and it's not a huge deal, why would you tell them that they need to drop and focus on this? What do you see as kind of the biggest benefit that you've got of really helping them understand the service, really being more on that luxury side?
are you talking to if I were going to talk to another operator
If
and
you're
explain?
if you're going to talk to another operator, if you had to say, hey, being that luxury provider, focusing on that customer service, really kind of having that view, what advantage has it given you?
Well, obviously you have to know what you want to do in this business. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the one thing. You can't be wishy-washy and think, well, I'm gonna go buy a bus tomorrow and be in the bus business. If you are in the corporate side and you're focusing on car service and not everything else in between, I think that the advantage I have is I tell people that, we are an executive car service. That's what we do. That's what we project ourselves as. I'm not everything to everybody. And my ideal being is that, and I think my mom probably drove it into me the most, is, if you could have one luxury in life, it's to be driven. And I tell lawyers, and I tell this to my competitors, and I don't like to do it because I think it gives away my game plan. But
Yeah.
if you tell a lawyer, sir, if you sit in the back seat of my car, you can change that from an expense to billable hours. And you can work comfortably from here to there, doing whatever you need to do. And when you're done, you can relax on the way back because you have a trusted chauffeur, not just a driver that's not weaving, in and out of that red Honda that's in front of you, getting you to and from safely and securely. So when I tell people that's what we do, I give away my game, but it's important because anybody can drive an Uber and a Lyft and try and get
Yeah.
there as quickly as you can, or a cab if you can find one that's clean that you want to sit in for a period of time. But what we do is different. We offer a luxurious ride to people that are willing and looking for an experience that's different, but it makes sense to them.
Right.
That's the other part of it. We have to make sense to the people that we're talking to. I, struggle with people that are the first time, they want an SUV for a Saturday night to go out and have fun. Well, that's not really what we do, and to explain that to people, sometimes they think, well, you're a stuck-up snob. But this is what I do.
Right.
I transport, executives, their families, their employees to and from. They're willing to pay me a pretty high price to do what we do. And if their 18-year-old son or 21-year-old daughter is smart enough and ask mom or dad, hey, can we get the car for us for the weekend? That also puts that spark into them. This is what you can look forward to as you grow into your, corporate world.
Right.
But when I tell my competitors, I'm not looking for the people that are going out on Friday and Saturday nights for, yeah, sure, there's a lot of money in it, by all means, if that's what you want to do. But I want that car ready at 4 o'clock in the morning for the person that expects a clean car and a
Yep.
sharp chauffeur to be able to take them to the airport or to DC or wherever they're going. And we're fortunate to be very close to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And there are a lot of executives that travel down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and we have the closest airport. So, if someone needs to catch a 6 o'clock flight and they're 3 hours away, we're starting our day at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2:30 in the morning.
Right.
So I focus on one thing, and that's upper level travel for the people that want it and are willing to pay for it. And, I do talk to a lot of people. The first thing they say, hey, man, I just bought a party bus. This is what I want to do. That's fine. I don't do the party bus scene. Why not? Everybody wants one. Well, yes, you're right. Everybody wants one. I said, and by the way, have you gotten insurance on it yet? No. So, there's a lot of things that go into what we do and why I think all the operators run their business differently. And I also think if you do one thing and you do it very well, you're going to get that reputation of doing that one thing real well. And mine
Right.
is, driving corporate car service.
You've got a really good point there in finding your lane and staying in it. I deal with a lot of operators. I talk to a lot of people in the industry. They kind of, like you said, they go out and they buy a bus and they say, hey, I went out and I bought a bus. One of the biggest things that we're seeing right now on the training aspect side of it is I'm seeing that with sprinters. It's I went out and I bought a sprinter. Well, great. Do you guys, are you having them do our hours of service training? Do they have their medical cards? Are you doing your regulatory compliance? Well, what are you talking about? It's a sprinter. Okay. Well, is it 9 passenger? Right? It is, because remember, 8 passengers plus that driver right? Now all of a sudden it's a commercial motor vehicle. Or, if you've got a dually in the back, one of the favorite rules of thumb I was taught by a compliance manager that has been in this industry as long as I've been alive, right? One of his favorite rules is if there's a dually in the back, guess what? It's probably over 10,000 pounds. If it's over that, that applies. So you get a lot of people that kind of lose the focus on the lane, like you're talking about. And I think knowing what your lane is and knowing how to work within that. And like you said, I think if you want to expand what you do, that makes sense. But I think knowing where you sit and what you are doing is huge. And I think you've kind of nailed understanding where you want that lane to be. And also talking about, something really difficult. I hear a lot of companies where work gets tossed their way, like you were talking about with, the retail side. Work gets tossed their way. And rather than say, yeah, that's not our forte, or, I'm sure if Ken was here, he'd probably say, hey, yeah, take the work, farm it out, right? But, finding a way to either send them in the right direction or take care of it in a way that makes sense. I think a lot of people are scared to say no to any kind of work, right? They're more likely to take every kind of work that comes their way.
Well, and, we had to face the fact that, wedding planners like what we do. And that has become a pretty big part of our business. And I don't say no to grand departures, what I like to call them, at the end of the night, or getting the bridal parties to and from. But that's a huge business. And I think that, I am very, very quick to, when people say, look, I need 25 passenger coaches, or I need this, here's the number you need to call. I don't really like to farm out that work because that becomes a real challenge. I do farm out some of it, but I would rather have those people have the relationship with the bus companies or people that have the bigger vehicles, because number one, it's a whole nother person that you have to have. Is that person going to be on time? The affiliate type of thing. So I do think that you have to be able to have some of the retail side. I'm not big on proms, although if one of my executives says, "You're taking care of my daughter," yes, sir. That's not that's going to.
But that's an extension of your executive work, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the other things, and I find it's one of, as a father, I can tell you that's one of the biggest compliments, right? When you've got someone that you're taking care of, and they say, "Hey, I trust you with the most important thing in my life." Mm-hmm. So I think, obviously that one sits in a bit of a different place. But absolutely, I think the nice thing is if you have a company that has those vehicles that you don't, and you guys are able to fill those gaps for each other, obviously I'm sure that work, and when they're getting it, that makes sense, probably comes back to you as well.
Yes. And again, another thing, when I came into this industry, I found out very, very quickly, you have to have friends wherever you go. If a car breaks down in Richmond or up in the DC area or wherever you might be, you have to develop those friendships. And sometimes it's difficult because, people's personalities might not be as pleasant as we like all the time, but it is really important in this industry. And we all see it. I don't think there is an industry like ours that works as closely together with each other as we do. And
no, I will say, out of every industry I've ever dealt with, we probably have the most unique dynamic in the passenger ground transportation space, just because we are in a world where you might be competing for the same business on Monday, yet you might have lost out on getting that business on Monday, but still have to do some portion of it working with the person that won it on Friday when the trips are actually coming through. So I think it's really interesting. And I think it also is, I think of it a lot like sports. You've got your guys that during the game are yelling at the ref and they're mad in the parking lot and they're throwing the fit, versus the guys that will, hey, good game, even if it was super competitive. And then the next week would be willing to play on the same team as the other guys they were just so competitive against. I think understanding that competitiveness, yet that rising tide raises all boats mentality, I think is really important, because I think one of the things that we're seeing as an industry now is we are seeing the changes and the expectations and the things that are coming down the road with autonomous, with what happened, with the electric vehicles, where everyone really wanted and was excited about electric, and it caught on in certain places and others it didn't. And then you've got rideshare. So I think kind of understanding how we all, and maybe this is just, the pack side of me talking, but I find that understanding that we all have to play out of a similar playbook in terms of the standards and the service and what we provide, because at the point where we're not doing that, we lose that differentiation that holds the industry above some of the other alternatives. No, I was going to say, Paul, what is kind of your thought on what the future looks like for your business and kind of in general in your market? What are you seeing, or what trends have you identified?
Well, I will say that 21 years into this, I'm finally getting a lot more local business than I used to have, which is very unusual. I think a lot of people go after local business first, but we are seeing another company, another competitor in town that's not a black car service, having trouble filling their jobs, and those people are starting to call us. It's sticker shock, and I'm getting a big pushback because of price, but we still are finding people that want to be serviced by a good executive car service, or good reliable transportation to the airport or to wherever they're going to. We have a building cruise ship terminal here that is pretty popular. So there are people that want that service to get to and from. I don't think the TNCs are getting more popular at this point. As a matter of fact, I think they are suffering from not having enough help these days, and that's making their reliability less. So being reliable, having the reputation of being reliable, I think that will continue for as far as I want to push the company, as as long as I want to hang on to it. I do see, everybody talking about autonomous cars, but I also see hackers, and I don't see how we can't think about the frat boys on Friday night steering the beer truck over to the frat house. I just don't think it's that safe yet. I think it's going to be many years, more years than what people, and I know I'm getting pushback from some really smart people who are saying it's already happening. Just go to Arizona or go to someplace and it's happening. Well,
I've ridden in them in Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens in New York. If a few pedestrians or bicyclists get run over, it's gonna create a challenge for that market. Will it happen eventually? Yes, there's no question. But for me, and going forward and trying to keep, my focus on doing what we're doing, I think that we have to maintain the right people behind the wheel, and that's becoming a little bit of a challenge. So, I'm going to more networking meetings and trying to meet younger military people. I'm really hoping that I can, step back and have somebody start taking the reins a little bit, and I can go out and shake hands, and eventually, somebody will want to take over the business, because I think as long as we do what we do and we do it well, there'll be a place for us. It's just like white tablecloth restaurants. There aren't very many of them, but usually it's hard to get into them, and they're full because they're doing the right thing. And that's, if we do the right thing, I think there's a future for us.
Well, and I'm sure there will be an episode at some point in the future on this, but as someone that lives in the training space, I see a couple things, and you've kind of hit on a few of them. I think the first is, for example, if I were to leave the transportation industry today, right? No intention to do that. I love it. But if I said, hey, that's it, I'm out of the transportation industry. From being in the industry, I can tell you my understanding is, if it's mission critical, if you've got to be there, if you need it on time, if you've got to get taken care of, if it's exec, if it's work, there really isn't a better option than the black car industry. Mm-hmm. Because the reputation of the black car industry is that we're on time, we're reliable, we get it done. You're going to be able to relax in the back seat. You're going to be able to get work done. And that is kind of a crucial item. We've seen it happen with TNCs. We've seen it happen with rideshare, where they have their premium or their luxury or whatever level it might be, and they send me the same guy in shorts and a t-shirt, now driving a black Escalade, or now driving a black Suburban or a Yukon, right? They think because they've changed the vehicle, they've changed the level of service. And what, obviously you understand, I understand, those that get it understand is that no, you've just changed the car. It's a premium car, not a premium experience. And so I think what we have is the opportunity, even if autonomous was to become the new standard tomorrow, let's get real. If I've got no one to help me load my baggage in the vehicle, if I've got no one to help me at my destination, if I've got no one to take care of me in the vehicle, I mean, little things. No, so I feel like you just hit on something really good. And I think there's two big things there. I think regardless of what happens with the future, you always have to have someone to give that experience, to give that customer service, to be able to do that in a way to where if it's, 4 a.m. and I've got, me and 7 executives, someone's there to help us load and get into the vehicle. Even when we get to the days of autonomous, I feel like you still got to have some level of service. Sure, there's going to be probably the majority of people that are going to want a vehicle to show up and they jump in and they go. But the other side of that is, from the way the industry is, if I've got a 4 a.m., right? If I'm going to be at the airport at 6 a.m. and I'm doing a 4 a.m. pickup because, I'm not going to leave it up to chance with a TNC. I'm not going to leave it up to chance with not making it. I'm going to go with someone that I know is reliable. And it's interesting because one of the things that PAX has done this year is a real push at GBTA and in these areas to help travel managers understand, to help those that are booking travel understand that the goal of what we do is ensuring that we are building those companies and we're building those chauffeurs, motorcoach drivers, shuttle auto drivers, everybody in there up to understand the importance of being on time, the importance of having an alternate route, the importance of kind of all of these things that go into it that you just can't get from an app, or you'll even get when you go to autonomous. A lot of this is really that experience. And so I think if we ever get to the point where we do see mass adoption of autonomous and these other things, we're still going to need that service component. Like you said, I mean, we when I was growing up, it was, the fast food era, right? Everybody wanted to roll through McDonald's, right? The staples when I was growing up were, McDonald's, In-N-Out, and Taco Bell. The In-N-Out should be a quick indicator of what part of the country I was in as a kid. But, then we saw kind of a shift of the casual dining, enter Chipotle's, enter these other restaurants. But the one thing that you mentioned never changed is you always had the fine dining experience, right? You always had the nice restaurant at the golf club. You always had, all of those all had a place. And I think one of the key things there is, even if those numbers get reduced, you still have that opportunity to be at that point. And I would argue when that scarcity becomes an issue, there's also an opportunity, and I'm going to touch a nerve. We'll have to do a whole nother podcast on this, but there's an opportunity to raise prices, because now if it's something that's more scarce, it's more rare, that's a higher level of service, you have the opportunity to really position that as a luxury item. So as we kind of wrap up, let me ask you, Paul, we really hit on one of the key things that I think for you, is something that you've always said to me and I've always agreed with, is that we are kind of the last Butlers. We are kind of the last level of luxury there. And when you think about it, that ability to have, as we'd say at PAX, the peace of mind. If you could go back to yourself when you were buying that first Cadillac, when you were getting into it, when you're thinking about it, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give yourself? Or what would you tell yourself now that you think would be valuable then?
The biggest thing would be to put money in the bank. That's the biggest thing.
Okay.
Because this is an expensive business. I don't care where you come from. It's an expensive business. But to be mindful, I mean, if you want to get into this business, executive car service, chauffeur car service, you have to make that what you say you're going to do. You can't, like you said, you can't be two different types of companies. You can't send the same car with a guy with a golf shirt and the khaki pants. If you are going to come into this business, you got to stay the course and try to learn as much as you can from other people. I think PAX training was a great way to get all of us to be on the same level, which again, I think is important. If I were going to come into this business, I would expect somebody to do not exactly what I do, but to try and be at that level. If you tell me you're going to come in and start a Chauffeur car service in a tennis shirt with khaki pants, and that's what you're going to stay with, that's fine. But if you want to do what I think the business is about, you have to be in a suit. You have to look as good as you want your business to appear, and the car's got to be that clean. And another thing I think too, when you bring on people, because there's no way you can be in this business by yourself. You can't be one car and run a business. It doesn't work. If you're going to bring on somebody, make sure that they're very, very well trained before you set them off on their own. And that's difficult because it's very tempting to say, hey, here's the keys. You know how to get to the airport, right? You cannot do that and expect the customers that you serve to appreciate that ride coming to you with no training. You have to have that person that is representing you be as good as you are. And I say that to my chauffeurs. It's great when somebody says, hey, look, I really want that chauffeur to drive me. But guess what? This is a part-time business. We don't have the luxury of a 9-to-5 job. That guy's not always going to be available. So, Timmy, Joey, Carl, you all have to be great, because I want everybody to say, I want you. It doesn't, matter which one of you it is. Sure, it looks good to them and they feel good about it. But the truth, the fact of the matter is, you're not always going to be available to drive that customer. And I don't want the other customer to think you're getting something less. So those things, know what you're getting into when you get into this business, and follow what you in your heart envision it to be, because that's what I did. I didn't deviate. I didn't, it's going to be a black car service, and that's what we're going to do. If you want to be the retail, do everything, that's fine. But understand it's the everything. You've got a lot of different moving parts in this business, and getting people where they're supposed to go when you say you're going to do it's the big part of it. But consistently doing it so that they're going to call you the next time and the next time, and they're going to tell their friends about it. That's what you want to aim for.
I think I would even take that a little further, and I would say that's your brand, and that's something that we've talked about on episodes before. But knowing that you can send any one of your team to go do a trip, whether it's your highest end VIP or a first time customer you know absolutely nothing about, but knowing that you can take anyone on your team, have them go do that trip, and that passenger is going to get the exact same experience, that exact same feeling when they get out of the vehicle. They're going to have that exact same type of trip. I mean, that really is your brand. And so I think you've really hit on that. That, for me, at least in terms of where I do and where I live, is one of the most crucial things. Because the worst case scenario is that you have your absolute best go out there, they blow the socks off the person, and then the very next trip you send someone else, it turns out to be, the opposite end of the spectrum. And you now have this disparity with, I had an amazing experience, I had a horrible experience. And I think we all kind of know the one that's going to outweigh that. I was always told it only takes one O, and I'll censor it, right? One O crap to ruin 1,000 attaboys. When my father told me that as a child, he wasn't as dignified in the way he said it, but the message really sank in. All it takes is one trip for that passenger that doesn't live up to that brand you're trying to build. And now all of a sudden it taints every other one. So I think that advice couldn't be more solid. Paul, I really appreciate you coming on. I absolutely love talking to you about this kind of stuff. As always, thank you to everybody who listened. Like, subscribe, comment, let us know what you think. I would love to know kind of everyone else's thoughts on this. And as always, thank you for listening to the Ground Transportation Podcast. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Ground Transportation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about PAX Training and to contact James, go to paxtraining.com. And for more information about driving transactions and to contact Ken, go to drivingtransactions.com. We'll see you next time on the Ground Transportation Podcast.